On the 15th of September 2016, Presha Dan, real name Obina Ezeoke, would carry out a heinous act that would shock the streets of London. However, every reaction has an equal and opposite reaction, and I'm here to inform you on why he did what he did. And for that, I need you to understand the history of the gang politics in the borough of Barnet and the key events that would shape his character. Like everyone, Presha Dan was a product of his environment. Now, Presha Dan is part of a gang known as 3BP, which stood for 300 Blocks Plus, located throughout Hendon, Millwall and Colindale, which contains the infamous Graham Park estate, an estate that has seen several generations of deadly gangs, most notably the one known as Thug Fam. They made national headlines when Thug Fam members Pesci and the Jammer brothers were robbing a local shop using guns and knives in Bradford. Customers and employees were tied up and pistol whipped multiple times as the members demanded money. One of the employers alerted the authorities by activating a panic alarm. As they made their way out of the shop, they were approached by two female officers. Pesci immediately opened fire at both of them, and all three Thug Fam members fled from the scene. Officer Teresa Milburn had survived, but colleague Sharon Beshenivsky died. Days later, all three were the most wanted men in Britain at the time. Now, Magambo had fled to Somalia. Pesci was hiding in Newport, Wales. As for Yusuf Yambo, he would be arrested a week later in Birmingham and charged with murder. 4 weeks later, police would get a tip-off, letting them know of Pesci's whereabouts. Police got intel that Pesci was going to board a tanker that was scheduled to sail to Pakistan in 48 hours. However, oddly enough, Pesci would hand himself in. In the following 18 months, police would gather intel and work with the Puntland forces in Somalia in order to catch Magambo, and would succeed. He was extradited back to London, and all three Pesci, Magambo and Yambo would be sentenced to life. Police would inflict their fair share of violence on the gangs in Barnet too. In 2005, 3BP/Graham Park member Slooky was in a car with two other 3BP members. They had been under surveillance and chased by armed police, aka Operation Trident. The police opened fire and killed Azalea Rodney as he was shot up to 8 times at point blank range. 3 guns were later found in the Gulf: a Colt .45 caliber pistol, a Baikal pistol, and a smaller gun described as looking like a key fob. The reason for the shooting was that one of the officers thought Rodney had a gun in his hand, which led to the police officer's reaction. The police officer, known as E7, has had a history of killing people. Before this incident, he killed 2 people. However, he was later acquitted of this murder.
2005, North London. And acting on intelligence that one gang is about to rip off another's drugs, police prepare to carry out what they call a hard stop. Those bangs are 8 shots fired by a police officer known only by his call sign, E7. Ezel Rodney, in the back of the target car, was hit 6 times. He died on the pavement. Armed police officers have to be able to justify their use of force every shot, and today's report concludes E7's could not be lawfully justified. The incident was reconstructed on a test track. E7 said he'd been able to see Rodney reach for a gun as his car drew alongside. But today's report concludes this was all he could see for just 0.06 seconds. It describes his immediate burst of fire as a preemptive measure, not the response to a clear threat. For Ezel Rodney's mother, today's findings are a turning point. She says they confirm her family's long campaign.
It seemed to me that Ezel was executed. The chairman's report, after detailed study of the evidence, is that he is sure and satisfied he shares my view.
The Met rejected that view of the report, but said its findings were significant.
They were working split-second decisions, and I think if you could have had the benefit of hindsight, you make a different decision. But the point is, they had probably a sort of 10, 20 minutes or so as the car was going across London to find the right opportunity to stop it, and it wasn't ever going to be perfectly, it was never going to be perfectly easy to find the right situation.
The main rivals 3BP had during this time was a Finchley-based gang. 3BP member Spooky would get into it at a party with an op. He would humiliate his Finchley op known as Shervin Evani by picking him up and dashing him in the bin. You know, the bins that had wheels on it. He would then proceed to wheel him down the road. Now, any man who faces this sort of humiliation would feel a type of way, especially those on the streets with access to weapons, so it's no surprise he sought retribution. Shervin and 4 others kidnapped a mutual friend of Spooky and tried to beat him into lowering Spooky to an empty flat. However, his friend, who was known as Jordan Garib, refused to give in. The group then tracked Spooky down 2 weeks later, on the 27th of October 2010, just after midnight, to a flat on soon-to-be demolished English Barracks estate. When they spotted him, they would fire off a volley of shots, causing him to run for it. However, Spooky would be hit in the chest before he could find cover. Spooky, real name Marvin Henry, died of his injuries at around 1:30 AM that night. Now, in the late 2010s is when the internal turmoil for the gang would occur. Police raids picking up members. This would cause some members to become police informers in order to receive a reduced sentence. One of these informers would be a main figurehead in the 3BP known as Vitz. This would cause an internal war, dividing a once united area. Soon, a lot of tit for tats would be exchanged by certain members, causing many to move from the NW9 area to the NW4 Hendon area. Those who moved to Hendon would now be known as 4BP. The other members on the other side would remain in Graham Park Estate and form a new gang known as 9th Street. Now, Presha Dan would be violently rushed and attacked by 4BP members. He was brutally stabbed over 20 times. Residents began to look out and witness his lifeless body. The police had then been called and rushed to the scene. In medical terms, he technically died shorter later while being operated on in hospital. However, he made a miraculous recovery. This is known as the Lazarus Phenomenon. Despite his recovery, he would be arrested and charged with drug offences. During his time behind bars, Presha Dan would vow retribution. Revenge was the only thing on his mind, especially seeing as his traumatic experience was recorded and shared all over Snapchat by rival gang members. One who Presha Dan recognised as a 4BP member known as Minnie. Presha Dan would gather intel and find the address of where Minnie lived. He would then proceed to shoot up his house, but no one would be hurt. Upon this scare, Minnie and his family would relocate to Finchley. Unfortunately, Presha Dan would gain intel on his new home. On the 15th of September 2016, Presha Dan would travel to the family's home, and just like a silent assassin, he crept noiselessly into the second floor family home. Presha Dan moved to his left and into a bedroom. There ahead of him was a young man, the cousin of Minnie. He was sleeping on a thin mattress on the floor under a duvet. Presha Dan crept forward, gun in hand, and shot him in the back of the head. The noise would wake up Minnie's mother, who then went to see what the fuss was about, before being shot dead herself. Presha Dan would then flee in his getaway car. He didn't manage to get Minnie, but he murdered his mother and cousin in cold blood. Presha Dan, real name Obina Ezeoke, would later be arrested and face trial for the double murder in 2017. The first trial in 2017 collapsed after then trial judge suffered a bad back midway through. 2 subsequent juries failed to reach verdicts in 2018 and 2019, despite a majority direction. The 4th trial was abandoned due to lockdown, just as the jury was deliberating in March. In previous legal argument, Ezeoke's lawyer, James Scobie QC, had said, "We are in uncharted territory. To carry on this case would be oppressive." The 5th jury to try the case deliberated for 41 hours over 8 days. Jurors were told that Presha Dan had crept into Mr. Coffer's home just after dawn and shot her sleeping nephew, who happened to be staying there at the time. When she got up to investigate, Presha Dan shot her too, the court heard. Prosecutor Mark Haywood QC said, "For the killer, this was as good as a target as you could expect. A young man of the house, of just the right age. He crept forward, gun in hand. He raised the muzzle and placed it almost against the back of the sleeping, dreadlocked head. And then, with a deliberation and purpose that was as much cowardly as it was murderous, he pulled the trigger." After Presha Dan had unleashed hell, Mr. Coffer went into the hall, dressed only in her underwear, jurors were told. Instead of waving his revolver to scare her off, the killer pulled the trigger for a second time, the court heard. Mr. Haywood told jurors that cowardly Presha Dan had gone to the flat deliberately to kill one of the teenage boys in the family as part of a vendetta of violence. He said his hate was such that he did not falter when confronted by a second person. He simply took her life as well. In fact, both lives were innocent. The young man he killed was a cousin, visiting at short notice for one night only. The prosecutor had said there was no doubt that execution-style killings amounted to murder, but the core question would be whether Presha Dan was involved. Presha Dan had admitted dealing in Class A drugs and said he was a victim of a serious assault in 2014, after which he switched to dealing cannabis instead. The key evidence against him centered around firearms residue found in Presha Dan's car, which was used in the getaway, and on his top recovered from a female friend's home. He claimed his Vauxhall Mariva had been leased from a man who took it back the day before the murder. He attempted to explain the presence of the gunshot residue, saying the vehicle, which was registered under false details, must have been used in a previous shooting. Presha Dan, real name Obina Ezeoke, was found guilty of double murder and sentenced to at least 40 years behind bars. He remained expressionless as he was handed a 40-year minimum jail term.
The life of a 28-year-old Nigerian, Obina Ezeoke, hangs in the balance after being convicted for murder by a court in the United Kingdom. And here in Nigeria, his father, Chidozie Ezeoke, is crying for help over what he calls a wrongful conviction by the British court after spending 4 years behind bars. Uche Okoro reports.
Obina Ezeoke was 24 years old when he was arrested in the United Kingdom in 2016. But his father, Chidozie Ezeoke, is hanging on to hope that one day his son would be set free. He was charged with double homicide for the murder of a woman and her nephew sometime in September 2015. After 4 courts were unable to convict him, a 5th eventually found him guilty. His father laments the failure of the British court to prove its case beyond reasonable doubt.
My son's own, they were not able to prove that because they could not account for, they could not show the weapon that was used for these murders. They were unable to put my son at the scene of the murder. And that was why the prosecution and the police now decided that the only way out was to make sure that the jury convicts, is to intimidate and coerce the jury. After an unprecedented, to me like this, what is now, what UK government, I don't know how they are going to defend this. I don't know how they are going to do it. That 1, 2, 3, 4 juries could not agree to convict this my man, and with no new evidence introduced, a 5th one did. Does that make sense?
Obina is due for sentencing by the British court on the 1st of October 2020. His 58-year-old father makes a desperate appeal to the authorities in Nigeria to intervene.
I wrote to the Attorney General and to the Diaspora Commission to intervene. But the way the systems are, if you do not have anybody pushing things for you, it becomes more difficult. But I believe that as your establishment is kind enough to give me this platform, I believe they will hear. And I believe that they will do something. My son will be sentenced on the 1st of October. And I hope that they'll be able to do something before then.
Before I conclude this video, I want to give a shout out to Moonman Mighty. He has helped me on a few videos in the past and he's super knowledgeable on Northwest London gang politics. Check out his channel for more content. I send my condolences to the family of everyone I mentioned. Make sure to subscribe and hit that like button. Till the next time.